Hello, everyone. I'm Jordan Fiorentini. I'm the winemaker for Epoch Estate Wines here in Paso Robles, and I am doing this really fun wine dinner for you guys. I wish I was doing it in person with you all, but this is kind of a cool idea to have everyone get samples of the wines and then be able to try the food and wine pairings at home. So thank you to Chris Gluck and the Wine Vault and Bistro. You guys have been such great supporters of Epoch over the years, and I'm thrilled to be doing this for you today. I thought it would be fun while you're tasting and eating if I actually show you some pictures and talk about the wines. So I'm going to do that now. You can either taste the wines first or taste the wines and eat during this, or just watch it and then pause it when you get to the certain wine and food, however you want to do this. But I just wanted to put some visuals to the words because the vineyards are so beautiful and so is the winery. So without further ado, I'm going to start my slideshow. So I hope all of you will start by trying the white. The white that you have is our 2020 Epoch White. This is a blend that we've been making for 10 years. And actually, I've been at Epoch for 10 years, more than 11 years now. My first vintage was 2010, and that was the first vintage we made a white. So this is a Grenache Blanc Viognier Roussanne blend, and it comes from two of our three vineyards, and the Catapult Vineyard and our Paderewski Vineyard. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The purpose of this wine was to always be crisp and bright and sort of envelop the nuances of the Rhone whites, but also be just enjoyable. And I love drinking this young or drinking it with a lot of age on it. And I'm jumping right into the wine so that you're not afraid to just start drinking when I do this slideshow. So the thing I love about this Epoch White too is that it is really versatile, and it's really hard to pair some foods with wine, be it artichokes, like is on the list today, or Thai food or some other Asian foods. But Rhone whites, and in particular our white, tend to pair really, really well with those difficult foods. So hopefully you'll enjoy this pairing. I know I would if I was able to eat it with you today. So we'll go on a little bit to talk about Paso and then Epoch in particular, but I wanted you guys to start drinking. You will also see, if you can see on this slideshow, that this wine was fermented in a combination of concrete, foudre, which is an oak cask, and also oak barrels. The percentages of the wine are on the back label as well. So where is Paso Robles? Hopefully a lot of you have been up here, but Paso Robles is equidistant between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and really close to the Pacific coast. And in 2013, we actually were able to subdivide the Paso Robles AVA into 11 sub-AVAs. So there are 11 districts within Paso Robles. So our two main vineyards, the Paderewski Vineyard and the Catapult Vineyard, are in the Willow Creek sub-AVA, which is the pink outlined area on the map. Our other vineyard is in the York Mountain AVA, which is actually just west of the Willow Creek. And York Mountain is its own AVA. It's not a sub-AVA of Paso Robles, but luckily we get included in Paso Robles marketing materials, and actually York has a really important history in Paso as well. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. So Epoch was founded by Bill and Liz Armstrong, their husband and wife team. They're both geologists, and they met in freshman geology class, and they've been together ever since. And they were looking to get into the wine industry in the early 2000s and looked all over California, actually the world for that matter, and really fell in love with the soils and the rocks in Paso Robles. In addition to that, they loved the community being Texans. They loved the sort of last cowboy town feel that Paso Robles has. So here's a picture of the Paderewski Vineyard, which is kind of it was the beginning, the rock of our brand, Epoch. So the Paderewski Vineyard is a gorgeous vineyard today, but it's actually a historic property. Back in the late 1800s, well, really pretty much early 1900s, this man who we see in these pictures, his name is Ignacy Paderewski, and he was a famous Polish pianist, composer, and politician. And he would travel around the United States on private rail car and perform to sold out audiences across the country. It was the early 1900s. We obviously didn't have TV, any other type of entertainment back then. So he was pretty much the Elvis Presley of his time. And he had really bad rheumatoid arthritis in his hands, and his doctor recommended that he come and soak in the mineral hot springs that were running rampant at the time in Paso Robles. So he was on the West Coast. He was actually in Seattle, and he was having such bad pain with his hand that he came down to Paso Robles to check out the mineral hot springs. Long story short, came here, fell in love with it, wanted to buy property actually bought property on the west side of Paso Robles. And the heart of the property that he purchased is actually our Paderewski Vineyard. So he was a very forward-thinking man, Paderewski was, and he decided to plant orchards, but also grapevines. And he wanted to make wine. And so we actually found these old boxes in a barn when we first purchased the property that became our Paderewski Vineyard. We named it that. It wasn't called that before, but we named that in honor of him. And here's just some old pictures of the ranch and a newsreel about how he was getting ready to visit. His vineyard on the west side of Paso Robles was really his happy place. He loved it here. He loved the community as well, and was really excited to make wine. So once he had grapes, he actually hired the York brothers, and the picture on the left shows the old winery. So he hired the York brothers to make his wine. He brought his grapes from the Paderewski Vineyard to York Mountain back in 1913, 19-teens, to be made into wine by the York brothers. We, as Epoch, were able to purchase the old York Mountain facility in 2010 from foreclosure and rejuvenated this historic property and have tied together the history of Paderewski and York Mountain for Paso Robles once again. So we took the old winemaking facility that had been condemned in the 2003 San Simeon earthquake, and we renovated it to be our new tasting room. We left so much of the old materials and equipment intact. As you can see, there's the old wine press that was used back in the early 1900s, and we've got it floating above our tasting room. And here's another picture, if you come visit us, of what the old winery / new tasting room looks like. And this is where you can taste Epoch wines. A little bit about the vineyards that we grow our grapes on. We actually have 3 vineyard properties: our Paderewski Vineyard, which we touched on, our Catapult Vineyard, and then the historic York Mountain Vineyard. So the old York Mountain Winery also had a vineyard property behind it. And we were able to replant this vineyard. It had been decimated by deer. And then we replanted vines where vines had once been. So just a few vineyard shots. The Paderewski Vineyard shows you how the sort of elevation of this property, and then it's situated where it can receive the cooling breezes that are coming from the Pacific Ocean through what we call the Templeton Gap. So we have these kind of really warm days in Paso, but then also really cool nights because of the proximity to the Pacific Ocean and the elevation here. And the soils are just crazy cool. They're a combination of limestone and shale that are vertically and horizontally fractured. And because of this fracturing of the soils, as you can see, there's a oak tree on the left. Its roots are able to go really deep into the soil, into the bedrock, to look for nutrients and water. Here's a picture of our vineyard manager holding some of the limestone soil that runs rampant at the Paderewski vineyard as well. And just a few photos of our catapult vineyard. You can see that this vineyard is actually mostly shale. It is also in the Willow Creek district, as I showed you before, and gets lots of cooling breezes. So it's really these intense daytime temperatures and soils, along with the diurnal temperature swings, that leave, in my opinion, it's really intense personality in the wines of Paso Robles. If you guys are familiar with the wines, you'll know. And finally, there's our York Mountain Vineyard. This is a much cooler property. It's west of West Paso, and mostly limestone containing soils. And it's a different AVA because it's totally different than the rest of Paso Robles. Let's get to the red wines now. So the 2016 Estate Blend is the first red that you will have. And here, I'm going to click off for 1 second, just so you can see my face again. One thing I haven't really talked about is the grape varieties that we grow at Epoch. So we mostly grow Rhone variety grapes. Those are grapes found in the southern Rhone area of France, most predominantly Syrah, Grenache, and Mourvedre. And then the whites, like we talked about, the Grenache Blanc, Viognier, and Roussanne, are also Rhone variety grapes. So we decided that we'd found this property and produce Rhone grapes, mostly blends, kind of like they do in a similar climate with similar soil of the southern Rhone. But in addition, we planted Zinfandel and Petite Syrah, because those are varieties that Paderewski had planted back in the early 1900s. So that is what we are aiming to produce across all three properties. And our estate blend is actually a snapshot of all of our vineyards. Well, it's definitely the Paderewski and the Catapult Vineyard. And now that the York Mountain Vineyard is online, in the future, you'll be seeing some of the York Mountain fruit in the estate blend as well. And it's really a snapshot of our vineyards in a certain vintage and our winemaking practices. And I always talk to people about when we go plant a vineyard, it's rolling hills or steep terrain. And each area, each block of the vineyard has a different exposure to the sun and also different soil types. So we're matching those exposures and the soil types to the grape variety and also the rootstock. So if you take this whole blend of all of that sort of patchwork collection of blocks that make up the vineyards, you're really getting a snapshot of what Epoch is all about. So the estate blend is always Syrah dominant, different percentages every year, but always leads with Syrah because Syrah is the largest portion of vineyard land that we have. And it is also a blend of Mourvedre, Grenache, and Tempranillo. And other years, it will have maybe Petite Syrah or Zinfandel or a slight amount of Carignan in it. Just depends on the vintage, but always those four varieties. And it also ferments and ages in a bunch of different vessels that we have in the winery. And that's where I play around and try to create the wines that I'm looking to create. So I make these tasting cards for our wines upon release. And so this front page always shows just it's almost like as if it was on a dating app. It shows all its stats in a fun way and a few notes about the flavors of the wine. And then if you flip it over, I have a drawing that I always do for every red that we make that we call of impression. And so basically this is something that just I do. No one's ever seen another winemaker or foodie do this, but I've been doing it for probably 10 years now. And it's where I depict on paper with graphite the way that the wine feels as it moves across my palate. So it's on a 4-part quadrant, and the top front of my palate is on the top left of the quadrant. And here is the expression as the wine moves from the front to the back or the left to the right. And it is just something fun and visual I do because I'm very texturally based as a winemaker. And texture is really hard to describe in words, but much easier to describe in picture if you think about your palate experiencing those textures. I'm super excited about the pairings that are here today with this wine. We always talk about the sort of umami flavors of that is we're capable of achieving, especially in the Syrah grape. In West Paso, where there's always this yin and yang of like the savory and the sweet and the mineral. And so I love that there's this Hawaiian style shoyu sugar steak going along with this estate blend. I just can't imagine a better pairing than that. And then, I mean, the smoked duck and andouille sausage. This is kind of a wine that I feel can stand up to a lot of spice or barbecue or just really bold flavors. So I can imagine that this is just a fabulous pairing. So I hope so. It is. You guys will have to tell me if that's the case. So the next stuff to talk to you guys about as you enjoy that wine is our winery and our winemaking practices, because I believe I've hit on the vineyards. There's so much to talk about. But this is a picture of our winery. It's actually just up the hill from the historic tasting room, or the historic old winery on York Mountain. And we got to build this after making wine for several vintages at a different facility. We actually started making wine at Denner Vineyards in 2007. So we really knew what we wanted when we designed and built this winery, which we were able to crush in 2014. So it's a really gorgeous facility. It's gotten Architectural Digest #2 Winery of the World Award. And I'm just so fortunate to call this my home, to be able to craft beautiful wines and be inspired by this incredible place every day. And you can see that the fog is rolling in this picture from the Pacific Ocean. So in the winery, I'm really big into concrete fermentation, and we use a couple different vessels for fermenting. The majority are concrete, as you can see in these two pictures in our tank room. We've actually replaced these tanks that I'm standing on right here, these stainless steel tanks, with concrete. So that's the other picture. But I'm really into the use of concrete as a means to help preserve the purity and the freshness of the wine, and not trying to get in the way too much. One slide I haven't shown you yet, which I'd love to show because it really brings you into the moment of harvest, is this one is showing Syrah grapes going across the sorting table. We pre-sort the grapes before they are destemmed, and then we sort them post destemming. So you can see that in both these pictures and how they come out like little blueberries. We do sometimes do whole cluster inclusion in our fermentations as well, in which case we would just do the sorting on the left side of this picture and then stomp the grapes and put them into whatever fermenter we're going to ferment in. So like I said, most of our wines are loaded into the concrete fermenters, but we also ferment in small vessels like puncheons, which are large barrels. They're 132 gallons, small stainless steel tanks, and oak casks. So the final wine is the 2016 Ingenuity. This wine I like to call the Paso Robles Rhone blend, because it's a Syrah-based GSM, but it has Petite Syrah in it. So in the wine world, Petite Syrah is not included as a Rhone grape, but in Paso Robles, we include it as one. And as I'd mentioned, Paderewski had planted Petite Syrah back in the early 1900s. And after he did a lot of research, actually, we have a lot of exchanges between him and the professors at the ag department of UC Berkeley that show that they thought that he should plant Zinfandel and Petite Syrah. So that's what we did. So it's a bold wine, Syrah dominant. So it's one of our heavier wines. It actually comes out in our fall release if you're on our mailing list. And the Petite really kind of adds a lot of delineation to the palate, a lot of structure, a lot of texture. From the 17 vintage on, this is the 16, but moving forward in the future, this wine becomes Petite Syrah dominant. So I try to give a lot of our blends varietal significance, but it's not a varietal wine necessarily. So again, the information of this wine, you can see it was 10% whole cluster, is on this info sheet, and my wine drawing is on the back. So if you guys have any questions about those, you can reach out to me if you're interested, because it's probably easier to describe or answer questions about them in person, but it's fun to look at the pictures as well. just some more like, I think I could call it drooly winery photos right now. Here's the concrete from the top. And then we actually have concrete in our barrel room as well, because the larger tanks that I showed you before are actually fermenters. But downstairs, we do some aging in concrete. We actually ferment and age our white wine in concrete egg and tulip, like you saw on the last screen. But then I also have played around with aging red wine in concrete, and over the years compared and contrasted wines aged in barrel to those aged in concrete. And what I determined is I really like what concrete gives us when we put our Grenache, our Sensibility, or our Mourvedre Grenache, which is our veracity wines, with a portion of concrete aging. So the majority of our wines, and all the wines that you're having today that are red, aged in barrel, but then know that we do some concrete aging on some of our wines as well. And here's just some pictures of the barrel room and a picture of the winery. The tasting room. Sorry, there it is right there. And here I am again. I forgot to mention the pairing that you're having with the Ingenuity, which is the bacon wrapped filet, potatoes, broccoli, and the cipollini onion demi. I just think that the combination of the bacon with the meat on this dish will work so well with, again, the bold flavors of the Ingenuity, but a little bit more, I don't know, I think the filet has a little bit more of it will have a little more of a refined character, and maybe the fat and the texture of that creamy chocolatey texture will work well with the Ingenuity. It's got some good age on it too. And that's one thing I didn't talk about yet, is that I really hope that people will lay these wines down too, and that they will age beautifully for many years to come. So you don't ever want to just buy one. You want to buy more than one, hopefully, so that you can try it sooner and one later. And then people ask me all the time, like, what is your age drinking window? And for a long time, I didn't want to answer that question, because it really is determined by you and what your sensibilities are. But because of the use of concrete, our grape growing practices, which I didn't touch on very much, but we use basically all biodynamic practices, and are really careful about not letting the fruit get too much exposure to the sun, get too ripe. We really want it to express the soil and the climate that it's in, but not have anything push and pull it in too much of one direction. But because of all this, the use of concrete and large barrels, and my desire to keep the wines really fresh, they need a lot of time in bottle sometimes before they reach their peak. But that is kind of up to you. So I love to give wines 2 to 3 years at least before I start really enjoy them. I say that the baby fat of the wine kind of falls off a little bit, and there's more of the core, the soul of the wine is what's there, and hopefully that remains intact for a really long time. And then as the wine gets 10 plus years old, they're still really beautiful and they're still really fresh, depending on the vintage and the blend. They can start to get like softer and just a little bit more of like this more like, it could be more enjoyable because it's not as textural, but then they're also maybe not showing the vintage as much. So I'm in the 3 to 10 year range is what I like to enjoy wines, but then other ones need some more time than that. And this goes for the white as well. We're still enjoying the 2010 white that we made so many years ago. Anyway, I hope that was interesting for you all. I wish I was there enjoying these fabulous foods and having some really interesting conversations about the wines and the pairings with you. But feel free to reach out to me or come visit Epoch. We'd love to have you all for a tasting. And cheers. And thanks again to Chris Gluck and the Wine Vault and Bistro for all your support over the years and for doing this fun event. Hope to see you guys soon. Take care.